And then I basically started my design journey as a marketing designer. I mean, majorly as a marketing designer. So a little backstory is when I finished medical school, I felt like I wanted to explore. I had a couple of friends who were designers at that time, so I wanted to see what, design was all about. And fortunately for me, I was able to get my very first freelance role. So I was freelancing at that time. And, it was interesting because I got paid for it. And then I got to see, people actually using stuff that I designed. So at that point, I felt like, okay, this is really cool. I mean, I could get paid for stuff, and then people actually get to use what I do. So, it was from that point I felt, okay, this is what I want to do. So regarding my, transitioning from marketing design to products was more or less out of me wanting to be in a field where I could better articulate my thoughts. So for some of us, you might have the experience of, you're designing a poster or a logo, for example, and then you deliver this to your client, and then your client tells you, oh, let me sleep on this, or let me talk to my wife, and I'll get back to you tomorrow morning. And then it comes back to you tomorrow morning and it says, oh, I don't like this design, or I don't like this logo. And you're wondering to yourself, why? And then he's not able to really give you any particular reason, So I wanted to be in a field where there's more structure, there's more context to what I design. And I was able to get that. And again, it was actually my very first time when I got a client referred to me. So I worked on their products. And then I found myself being able to really explain, oh, this is why I'm using these colors. This is why I'm making this action. This is why I decided to do this. And for me, that was really, it was like a breath of fresh air, because that was something I mean, technically you could do that with marketing design, but it's really, really subjective compared to products. And then, I decided to stick with it, and, it's been a journey. So over the years, I've had experience working in different fields. Currently I work in insurance tech, but I've worked in different fields like e-commerce. I've worked in fintechs. I've worked in traditional banking and finance. I worked with SMB at some point. So I mean, I've really worked in different capacities over the years, and then I'm really thankful for those, experiences, because I feel like, they've helped shape me as a better designer. So a little bit about my private life. I love to do photography, just for the fun of it. It also makes me see the world from, a different perspective. I don't know if that's enough, but that's a brief summary of my journey.
Yes, definitely. That's been a very interesting journey you've had. So considering all these places you've worked at, all the different industries, I'm assuming you've had a lot of experience with design systems. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Correct.
I guess you already know that's what we're here to discuss. So just can you start by telling us, about the design systems you've worked on, in the past, and what the experience has been like? Like, have you worked on it solo? Have you worked with other people? And then from there you could just jump into, what you have for us today on design systems.
Yeah, definitely. So let me share my screen. I'll talk a little, then I'll take it off from there.
All right, that's
Give me a second. Can we see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. So before I dive deep into this, so like you said, I've had experience working on design systems in the past. So in my current role, funny enough, I'm working on our design system currently. And basically what I'm doing is it's an adaptation of an already existing system, which I'm going to explain later. But basically my day-to-day role includes documentation. It also includes updating our component library, and then also working on refining the design tokens, which I'm also going to talk about later on. In the past, I've contributed to design systems. While in the past, I didn't really build from the ground up, but I've been a part of teams where, we really set standards for the design tokens. We set standards for, the tone of voice, some certain guidelines and all of that. So I would say I have a fairly decent, understanding of design systems. So to deep dive into, today's topic, I deliberately used this caption, demystifying, majorly because there's a whole lot of, maybe not a whole lot, but there seems to be some sort of mystery around what a design system is, partly because a lot of people use the term arbitrarily. Sometimes they don't actually understand what they are saying. They just use it maybe for the syntax or whatever. And then it's really important as, designers to actually understand, what is a design system? When do you use a design system? What are the rudiments of a design system? So basically, let me walk us through my agenda. So we're going to be talking about a lot of things today, and hopefully, some of us get to learn a couple of stuff. So we'll be talking about what is a design system, what is not a design system, because that's equally important. What makes up a design system, the benefits, examples, when to use, when not to use, how do you prepare a design system, how do you adopt, how do you adapt, how do you actually create from the ground up, and how do you actually use a design system? And last but not the least, how do you evolve a design system? So to start with, I will talk about the different definitions of what a design system is. So I went on the web. I'm going to give my own example, my own definition, but I wanted to more or less gather what other people are saying, just so we could have a compendium of different definitions. So according to InVision, a design system is a collection of reusable components, guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build a number of applications. Mr. Norman Group states a design system is a complete set of standards intended to manage design at scale, using reusable components and patterns. UXDesign.cc says a design system is a single source of truth, which groups all the elements that would allow the teams to design, realize, and develop a product. But I'm very sure a lot of us, this might actually seem a little bit too vague, because I'm sure some of the expectations would be, what actually is this thing? So to give my own definition based on my experience, I would basically say a design system is a combination of, a set of standards and components that you as a designer use within a team to make your life easy. That's my definition of it. And then we'll understand more about this later on. So it's equally important to define what is not a design system. A lot of times you come across some job postings and they're telling you, oh, you need to have, working knowledge of a design system. You need to have been, working on design systems for the past 10 years or past 20 years, and when you actually talk with some of these recruiters, sometimes they don't actually understand what they are saying, based on different, common misconceptions. So it's important to state that a design system is not a style guide, right? A design system is not a sketch or a Figma library. A design system is not a UI kit. So the question would be, so what then is it? So to break it down further, I would essentially say a design system is not a deliverable itself, so it's not a one-off solution. It's rather a set of deliverables, constantly evolving, and adapting to team and business needs. So to make this more practical, let's assume you are working in a team and then you need to scale. So let's assume your team is, let's say, a team of 50 plus designers, and then you are trying to scale your product forward. So when I'm saying scale, I mean, you are trying to deep dive into some other business perspective. You need to work quickly. You need to design stuff iteratively. You need to push stuff, and allow, the developers, have what they want to develop, ready. It's important to move at speed. it's important to have cohesiveness in whatever you do. And then that's where a design system comes in. So again, talking about what makes up a design system, like I said, it's not a deliverable itself. So like I said, a design system is not essentially a style guide or whatever. It's a combination of all of those things. So typically, your design system would include a style guide. It would include a design token or design tokens, rather. It would include your component library. It would include your patterns guide, your content guide. And of course, I think for me, I think the most important thing that defines a design system is also having a side-by-side code library, and then documentation. So these last two, for me, I think those are what actually defines, a design system. Essentially because what differentiates, so I would say the difference between a component library and the design system is the documentation and the fact that you have a code base for it. So as a designer, you're not working alone in a team. You are working with other developers. You're working with other people in the team. You might have a button designed in Figma, but at the end of the day, do the developers also have that state of button? Do they have it in their code base? If they don't have that same button in their code base, then essentially you don't have a design system, And then are there guidelines for that buttons? Are there situations that are specified for when to align this button to the left, when to allow you to fill the container, what are the documentation for this button? Those are some of the things that, set aside the design system. So like I said earlier, two things essentially make up a design system, which is the standards, not understanding not just the words, but the why, and then of course, what the components and how the components relate to the standards. Sorry, I might still be sounding abstract, but I'm sure you would, start understanding it a little bit better, hopefully. So I took this, I saw this, I was researching and I saw this table and I felt like it actually spoke my mind. So as you can see here, you have a table stating style guide, pattern library, component library, and a design system. A design system says yes to all of these things. A style guide says yes to some of these things. A pattern library states yes to some of these things. And then the same thing with the component library. So a design system is a design system if it incorporates a UI kit, it incorporates a templates, the branding, the usage, the typography, the tone of voice, all the rest. But as you can see, a style guide, for example, doesn't give you coded components. It doesn't incorporate a coded component. A pattern library, for example, also doesn't incorporate tone of voice or your typography, for instance. A component library, again, it's fragmented because it doesn't give you processes or governance. It doesn't tell you what the design system language is. It doesn't have, dynamic live components. But whereas the design system has all of these things alongside it, the documentation. So again, let's look at what we're seeing on the screen here. I also took this off the internet. So ideally, like I said, a design system is supposed to be a combination of stuff, both from the design side of things and from the developer side of things, right? So like I said earlier, if you have your colors style guide in Figma, then somewhere along the line or somewhere in the code base, there has to be an associated equivalence of those colors that you have in Figma, right? There has to be some sort of place where you document, your voice and tone, what your brand values are, what are the intentions behind, creating this component library, which you're using for your design system. So before we go forward, I would also talk about some of the benefits of a design system. I would say for me, the most benefit or the most important benefit for a design system is the ability to scale, which I will talk about later on. Another benefit is the ability to manage your technical debt, the ability to, design consistently, prototype faster, iterate more quickly. So talking about scaling design, I was trying to make an explanation earlier. So you have a team of 200 plus designers, right? As a designer, I love to have my design very minimal, right? I love white space a lot. But that might be different from you, Stephanie. You might be a person who likes colors. You might be a person who really likes to, deep dive, have all your elements really in the face of your user. Another designer, for example, might have a totally separate way of seeing design. And where the problem now comes in is when you have 200 plus of these people working on different parts of the product, because when you're working in a big company, designers don't work on the same part of the product. So some person might be working on the onboarding, another person might be working on search and discovery, blah, blah, blah. So the disadvantage to having individualism of design would be me as a person, I'm working on onboarding. I love to have myself minimal. You, Stephanie, you are working on search and discovery. You like to have all your elements in the user space. At the end of the day, when we are done with our design and everybody collates the design together and say, oh, this is what we've worked on, and then this is how the platform should look like, and then we push it over to production. The downside to that would be it doesn't look cohesive. It doesn't look like we came from the same team. I don't know if you understand. So there has to be some single source of truth saying, oh, these are the principles behind why this color should be this way. This is why this button should be aligned this way. This is why you should use this menu. This is the situation where this accordion should be used, blah, blah, blah. The importance of this is, aside from having a single source of truth, any new designer that joins the team, maybe tomorrow, already has something to reference. So when I'm facing a creative block or I'm trying to align a button, I don't just align the button because that's what I feel like. I'm aligning the button because this is what the documentation, or this is what the principles and guidelines says. And then another designer working on something similar will also be doing the same thing as I'm doing because we have something to reference to. So that's the power of, a design system. So it allows everybody to have a single source of truth. It allows everybody to be able to easily scale design, so irrespective of if you have 50 people on a team or if you have 20 people or 200 people, at the end of the day, the quality of work stays the same because you have something to reference to. And then it also, leads to less silos within teams. So everybody has an idea of what, each of what they are working on is going to look like. When we talk about managing technical debt, I don't know if some of us have also had this experience. I have. Sometimes when I'm working for startups where we don't have any sort of guidelines. So that means I'm creating buttons, I'm creating different states. And then tomorrow, my product manager comes to me and says, oh, we are not going this direction again. We have to pivot and go in another direction. What happens? That means for example, the buttons that are already created becomes redundant, right? Because I've changed direction, but I don't want to delete this stuff. So it has to stay in my library. And tomorrow, direction changes again. The accordion that I created, I also have to dump that, because I've changed direction. So you find that along the line, you tend to create a lot of non-reusable components, which doesn't help anybody. Number one, it doesn't help you as a designer. It definitely also does not help your developer because they're looking at your Figma or they're looking at their documentation and you have 4 types of buttons and then you're wondering which of these should I use? That totally defeats, the purpose of having a team or having design in the first place. So having a design system allows you to manage this technical debt because you're able to do an audit of all of these components. You're able to say, oh, this is what we are going to be using. This is what we don't want to use. This is how it should look like. And then everybody stays on the same page. Again, it also allows you to design consistently because when you have standardized components, I'm not just going to whip up my Shift A on Figma and create a button out of the go. Another person comes and creates a button of blue color and I'm creating purple. No, you don't have that because there's a set of guidelines to follow and everybody is designing, consistently. Again, I think for me, it's also really helpful when I'm trying to prototype. So prototype in this case, for me, not just drawing the lines, but it also means me being able to explore different design versions. So I'm working on a landing page, for example. I'm able to create 2 to 3 types of designs because I have all the components that I have ready. So I'm not thinking about, oh, how do I create this button, or how do I create this image, or how do I use this table? I already have all these things designed or laid out for me. So it's easy for me to really just go into the library, look at the documentation, piece everything together, and I have everything ready in a matter of time. So it allows people to really, move fast and, have something to show business executives, if that's your situation. Then last but not the least, it allows you to iterate more quickly. This is kind of similar to what I talked about earlier. So at this point, some of us might be wondering, okay, so what can we have practical terms of what a design system looks like? I'll be showing you some. Some of us might be familiar with this. So for example, we have material design. We have, Atlassian. We have from Carbon IBM. I think at this point, I would also like to give me a second. Let me show us. So let's actually go to these websites and see what it looks like. So currently, I'm on Carbon Design System by IBM. And then this is what their documentation site looks like. So you would see that in this case, looking at the left panel on the screen, you can see different sets of guidelines. For example, you can see guidelines, you can see components, you can see patterns, right? So for me, Carbon's IBM design system is my favorite design system because it features in fact, for me, I feel like it's the holy grail when it comes to design system because they've done such an amazing job piecing together how you should combine design and development together. So not only do you get to see some of these guidelines, you get to see the usage, right? So you get to see, oh, these are the color tokens. You get to see how it actually looks like in code, and then you get to see how it should be implemented, right? So after this call, I would encourage all of us actually, to go to some of these websites and see how, they've laid out all of these things. You might get some inspiration from this. Then, of course, you have the Duolingo brand. So when I was talking about setting tone and voice, for example, as you can see on the screen, they are giving you, this is what it should look like, not this, like this, not this. So it actually gives you an idea of what you should be thinking of if you're a designer working for this brand, for example. And even as an external, you get to see a clear picture of how these people are thinking and, what they feel like good design should look like, And then, of course, you have Shopify, Polaris, it's also an excellent design system. So let's deep dive into what's the business of the day. Sorry for the deviation. So again, a question that might be coming to mind would be, when do you actually use a design system? When do you not use a design system, right? Like I said, let's go to when not to use or why you might not have to use a design system. So if, for example, you are in a small team where, let's say you are a team of 5 people, right? You are a startup, you are just building stuff. You have close communication with your team members, right? At this point, I wouldn't really advise anybody to use a design system because it's an overkill for your team. Basically, because if you have questions, you can easily reach out to your dev, right? You can send a Slack message and they reply to you in 1 minute, right? So for a lot of small teams, a mistake that I see, and again, I think the downside to creating a design system as a small team is you tend to spend too much time on what is not needed. So you're a small team, your primary goal is to go to market. You want to go to the market live, right? You want people to use your products. So I would rather focus on getting the bare basics done, building the prototype or, scrapping everything together, getting to the market first, seeing what your users are saying. And then once you are well established, then you can say, oh, okay, now we've got in there. We have the funding, we have the manpower, we have the time. Let us start making things consistent. I'm not saying you shouldn't make things consistent as a small team, but I'm saying a design system is more or less an investment which you should actually think twice, before starting to want to adopt it. Again, if you are working for a development agency, I've worked at agencies in the past, and this is what you are seeing on the screen is out of my own experience. So for me, I really don't think it makes sense as someone working in a design agency, or even for design agencies or development agencies for that matter, to use design systems. And the reason for that is, as an agency, you have a lot of clients, right? They are coming to you to get basically sometimes maybe their MVP or a one-off website or something. In that case, sorry for the language, but I feel it's going to be foolishness for you to say, oh, we want to be creating design systems for each and every one of these clients coming to us. It doesn't make any sense, you know? So in this case, if you are a part of a design or a part of a development agency, then, you know, it's too much work. It's redundant because, again, there's no point doing it, to be honest. So I don't think there's a point for agencies to actually use a design system, except if you are building stuff based off of your own, how do I explain? So if you as a design agency, you have your own standards that other people are borrowing, then it might make sense for you to do that, essentially because it's going to make production fast. But if you are creating custom solutions for each and every client, then, you know, it doesn't make any sense. So again, another reason why it might not make sense for you to use a design system is when your business has a limited runway. So like I said earlier, you have a tight deadline to meet. Your investors are asking you, Alpha, what's up? You know, when are you going to market? You know, you are trying to find the best product market fit and all of these things. And it just does not make sense for you to invest at design systems, you know, at this early point. Yeah, so moving forward, again, I think it's important to also note that creating, like I said, creating and maintaining a design system is really time intensive. I've been there, I've seen how it works. And as a one-man design team, I wouldn't venture on creating a design system because it's going to make me unproductive. So time when I would rather be focusing on actually designing a solution, I will be spending that time on creating components, creating documentation. It's really not just worth it, you know? So there has to be a dedicated team, and which is actually what most companies do. So if you look at companies who really have like good UX maturity, they have a design systems team where it could comprise of 5 or 10 people actually, you know, working day in, day out to simplify processes, you know, simplify components, and actually push to other designers within the team. So if you're a one-man team, I really don't think it makes sense to start thinking about using a design system. But of course, there's also a leeway, which I'm going to talk about. It's called adapting a design system, which I'll talk about later on. So again, we've talked about when it might not be a good idea to use a design system. So when is it actually a good time, or when is it recommended to use a design system? So, you know, for example, your team is growing, you're having a lot of technical depth, you want to maintain consistency. Definitely, if you have the manpower, this is the best time to create a design system. You know, if the business is buoyant enough to actually hire and maintain a team, or people who their main job is to maintain and build a design system, then that's fine. You know, it's actually a good time to use a design system. Of course, again, when your product needs to scale forward and then you want to go ahead without having too much of technical overhead costs, then it makes sense to, you know, use a design system. So we've talked a lot about what a design system is, what it does, blah, blah, blah. You know, how do you actually prepare to use a design system? For me, this is what has worked for me in the past. You know, our situations might be different, but I feel like this is a good way, or this is a good basis to start, right? So there are different ways to go in about it, but ideally the first way would be, you know, making a list, you know, getting buy-in from relevant stakeholders. Because at the end of the day, as a designer in a team, there are people who are making business decisions, right? Building a design system has its own cost implications, and then you definitely have to get buy-ins from these people. They have to support you before you can actually go ahead to, you know, make some of these decisions. Of course, there has to be a team. If you are a multiple, if you are, you know, if you're a 5 to 10 or 15 plus, you know, team, you have to form a team where they can properly maintain this. And then, of course, you have to define, you know, the type of design system, you know, depending on the dynamics within your team or within your company. So when I say make a list, the practical way to go about this would be, first things first would be, you want to identify what the pain points are currently. So, when you are working on the last project or the last sprint or whatever, the question would be what worked well, what did not work well the last time, how do you actually go about making these things work well? How can it translate into a design system? Talking about principles and workflow, it's important to also gain clarity in terms of, the last time I was working on this sprint, I had issues aligning a button. So that shows me that we don't have stringent, guidelines to inform decisions that designers are making on the team. Or I don't know what grids to use on this page. It shows you that there is a lot of work to be done, when, in terms of setting the guidelines or setting patterns and all of that. Was there constant repetitions? For example, like when you're working on the past sprints, did you have to complete, did you have to constantly repeat tasks, create buttons from the ground up, and this is affecting, your product turning time? Then, you have to, make a list and identify all of these things. When it comes to getting buy-in, what you should do, what you should be focusing on doing would be, it's not enough to say, we need a design system, right? What you should be doing is, do people at the top, they don't speak design language. So you have to make it relatable to them. You have to explain to them how, adopting or how creating a design system is going to benefit the business. Nobody wants to waste money on what is not going to profit them. So you have to be saying, if we need to have a design system because we could reduce our design sprint from 4 weeks to 2 weeks because we have something to reference to, and it's going to increase our turnaround time, or it's going to save us overhead costs, And again, it's also important to show existing examples. So, for example, I showed you Carbon's IBM, Atlassian and all of those things. You could show them how these libraries are set up and how it could potentially benefit your company, right? And last but not the least, like I said, it's important to gain approval from, the decisions maker, because you can't make the decision on your own. You have to get buy-in from people. Then again, it's important so for me, this is the optimum way to go about forming a team. So typically, a design system team would include a couple of designers. They are the ones creating the visual components in Figma, or this is what the button is going to look like. This is the hover state. This is the click state, blah, blah, blah. This is what happens when you align this button. This is what happens, blah, blah, blah. So designers are like a core part of the team, but it doesn't end there. You have to have your developers in sync. So the developers equally would say, the designers are saying this button has a blue color. It has a border radius of 5 pixels. This is what it should also translate into, in our code base, right? So whatever you have in your design tool for Figma, for example, your developers will probably also be creating a framework, maybe in React or something, to mimic one-to-one what you have in your design tool, Figma, for example. And then I noted this third one because that's what I started learning recently. So it's not enough to just say, we are creating components, we are doing this, we are doing that. There has to be quality assurance. So there has to be someone both from the design team and from the development team as well, saying, we've created this accordion. Does it work well? Is it resizing properly? Is it taking the auto layout correctly? Is it hugging the content, blah, blah, blah. So there has to be consistency. And of course, your component has to work smoothly, because at the end of the day, the end users of your design system are the designers and the team, right? So as a designer using something the design system teams worked on, if I'm using a button and the auto layout doesn't work well, then they have failed at their jobs, right? So they have to constantly ensure that whatever components, whatever guidelines are setting is something that people can truly use. And then again, the content strategies are really important as a part of the team. For example, what I learned recently was, for example, if you have an accordion, right, and they are supposed to have some brief description, there has to be some sort of, some sort of guidelines to how description text should work, how your tone of voice should be. Are you being passive to your customers? Are you being aggressive? Are you being active? You know, what are your call to actions like? What's the language like? You know, are you using all caps or are you using uppercase? You know, blah, blah, blah. So this is where the content strategists come in and say, oh, this is what the guidelines should look like. So again, different types of design systems. There are a lot of types of design systems. You have modular, you have non-modular, but to simplify things a lot, I decided to go with the way they've structured their design system. An example of a loose design system is Ant. Ant's design system is loose in the sense that you can customize it, you know, you can experiment, tweak the colors, and then you can really create different brand feel and all of that. So as a team, you need to define how you want your design system to be. If it's going to be used internally, if it's going to be open source, so other people can also come, you know, and use your design